Hello, everyone. Lwig here with a story that'll grip your heart and refuse to let go. Imagine this. What would you do if you witnessed Clint Eastwood, yes, the Clint Eastwood, shuffling up to a restaurant counter, humbly asking for a glass of water, only to be denied and unceremoniously booted out the door? Picture that scene unfolding in a place that boasts the most socially conscious, inclusive staff in all of San Francisco. Sounds like a plot twist straight out of one of his gritty westerns, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what happened. Except no one knew it was him. What Clint uncovered during his undercover mission at Vine and Liberty in San Francisco isn't just shocking. It's a raw, emotional gut punch that'll leave you questioning everything. Before we plunge into this tale, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from today. I'd love to hear from you. It all began last September, under the golden haze of a San Francisco autumn. Clint Eastwood's investment group had just acquired Vine and Liberty, a downtown gem that had once been the beating heart of the community. For 30 years, it thrived under the care of its previous owner, Chuck Wilson, a Vietnam veteran with a gravelly laugh and a handshake that could steady your soul. Chuck had built the place brick by brick, pouring his life into it until illness forced him to step away. The restaurant wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary where locals gathered, where stories were swapped over steaming cups of coffee, and where veterans, Chuck's brothers in arms, always found a warm meal and a warmer welcome. But when new management swept in, that heart seemed to flatline. The old staff, many of them veterans who'd carried the spirit of the place, were quietly phased out. In their place came a younger crew, their faces fresh and their ideals loud, plastering the windows with bold social justice slogans. The Veteran Discount Program, a lifeline for so many, vanished without a whisper. Clint hadn't yet set foot in the place himself, tangled up in other projects, as he often was. But one crisp evening, his phone buzzed with a call that would change everything. On the line was a local TV producer, his voice tight with urgency. He had footage, damning, unfiltered footage, of Vine and Liberty's new staff mocking elderly customers, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Worse, they'd been caught on social media, preening about their progressive credentials while turning away homeless veterans at the door. Veterans who, under Chuck's reign, had sipped free coffee every morning like clockwork. The producer's words hit Clint like a freight train, especially after what he'd read earlier that week. 3 local veterans, men who'd given everything for their country, had taken their own lives after being abandoned by a system that failed them. One of them, a grizzled regular named Tommy, used to sit at Vine and Liberty's counter every day, nursing a black coffee and swapping war stories with Chuck. Now Tommy was gone, and the place he'd once called a second home had turned its back on men like him. That's when the spark ignited in Clint's mind. A spark that would soon blaze into something unstoppable. He could have stormed in as the owner, demanding answers with that steely glare we all know from the screen. But Clint Eastwood doesn't do things the easy way. If this staff was as compassionate as their rainbow-decaled windows proclaimed, surely they wouldn't turn away a weary soul in need. He decided to dig deeper, to peel back the polished veneer and see what lay beneath. What he was about to uncover would rattle him to his core, setting off a chain of events that would ripple far beyond those restaurant walls. touching dozens of lives and exposing a truth some would rather keep buried. Even the TV producer, who'd tipped him off with a mix of excitement and dread, couldn't have foreseen the storm brewing over the next 24 hours, or how one simple request for a glass of water would crack open a fault line in society's facade. This wasn't just another role for Clint Eastwood, though. This was personal. To pull it off, the transformation had to be flawless, because sometimes, as he'd learned through decades in Hollywood's spotlight, the truth needs a nudge to step into the light. He called in Tom Martinez, a makeup artist whose hands bore the scars of a life well lived. Tom wasn't just any pro. He was a Vietnam vet who'd worked special effects on war films, a man who knew how to craft authenticity down to the finest wrinkle. "Mr. Eastwood," he said with a wry chuckle as he layered prosthetic wear onto Clint's iconic face, "I never thought I'd be helping you become invisible." His weathered fingers moved with precision, adding crow's feet and a sallow tint that erased the Hollywood legend. "I've seen too many of my brothers fade away on these streets," Tom murmured, his voice dropping low. "They didn't need makeup for that." When he stepped back, the mirror revealed not Clint Eastwood, but a man society often overlooks. A tired, weathered figure with stooped shoulders and a story etched into every line. But Clint needed more than a disguise. He needed to feel the weight of the reality he was stepping into. So, he spent the next few hours at a local veteran shelter, not preaching or directing, but listening, really listening. There was James, a former Marine with a barrel chest and a gaze that could pierce steel. He'd saved his entire unit in Afghanistan, dragging wounded men through hellfire, only to come home and lose everything to a mountain of medical bills. Sarah, a Navy medic with gentle hands and haunted eyes, had patched up soldiers under fire, but couldn't land a job because PTSD shadowed her every step. And Michael, a lanky Army vet who still wore his faded jacket like a badge of honor, despite not having a roof over his head in 3 years. "You know what's funny?" Michael said, oblivious that he was speaking to a legend. "I used to hit Vine and Liberty all the time. The old owner, Chuck, he got it. He'd been there himself. Every morning, coffee and a nod of respect. Sometimes, that's all it takes to keep a guy going." As the veterans poured out their stories, a TV crew, staffed by former military operators who moved like ghosts, slipped into place around Vine and Liberty. Hidden cameras nestled into corners, their lenses poised to capture every fleeting glance, every whispered word. This wasn't just about footage. It was about unmasking a truth that demanded to be seen. None of them, not Clint, not the crew, not the veterans sharing their pain, could have predicted what those cameras would record in less than a day. A simple request for a glass of water would ignite a firestorm, exposing not just the hypocrisy festering at Vine and Liberty, but a deeper wound in the fabric of a community that had forgotten its roots. First, though, Clint had to vanish completely. And as he'd soon learn, invisibility carries a price that cuts deeper than any script he'd ever read. The morning sun blazed down on San Francisco's streets as Clint approached Vine and Liberty, his disguise clinging to him like a second skin. The restaurant's windows sparkled with fresh signs, "All are welcome here," and "Kindness is free," in bold, cheerful font. Inside, a young couple in designer threads lounged at a prime window table, their curated outfits blending seamlessly with the upscale vibe. "Make sure everyone walking by sees how inclusive we are," Clint overheard a staffer say, adjusting a rainbow flag with a smug grin. Just then, an elderly couple strolled past, the man's veteran cap tilted proudly atop his gray hair. They paused to squint at the menu, only for the same staffer to mutter to her colleague, "Not really our target demographic," her eyes rolling with practiced disdain. Clint took a steadying breath and pushed open the door, the bell jingling faintly above him. The hostess, a 20-something with a nose ring and a plastered-on smile, froze as her gaze landed on him. "Sir, I'm afraid we're fully booked," she said curtly, though the dining room boasted several empty tables, their polished surfaces gleaming under the lights. The hidden cameras whirred silently, catching every twitch of her expression. "Please," Clint rasped, his voice roughened from hours of practice. "I haven't had water all day." "Could I just get a glass?" He nodded toward the water station mere feet away, glasses stacked neatly, a pitcher brimming with ice-cold relief. But before she could respond, the manager swooped in, his designer glasses perched atop a face that screamed calculated coolness. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone dripping with the implication that Clint was the problem. "Just water," Clint repeated, adding softly, "I'm a veteran." The manager's lips tightened into a thin line. "We're not a homeless shelter," he snapped. "There's a public fountain 3 blocks down." His hand was already reaching for his phone, security on speed dial, no doubt. But as Clint stood there, weathered and unyielding, he caught a glimpse of something else. The manager turning on a dime to greet a group of young professionals with a megawatt smile, gushing about the restaurant's community involvement and their monthly donations to social causes. The contrast was sickening, and the cameras caught it all. What they didn't know was that earlier that morning, one of those hidden lenses had peered into the back office where the manager hunched over a spreadsheet. The screen glowed with numbers, charitable donations meant for local shelters, meticulously tracked. But instead of reaching those in need, the money funneled into slick social media ads, boosting Vine and Liberty's progressive image. As Clint turned to leave, a young waitress, Jenny, her name tag read, watched from the sidelines, her brown eyes flickering with something different. Shame, maybe. Defiance, perhaps. She gripped a water pitcher, taking a tentative step forward, but the manager's glare pinned her in place. "Sarah," he barked, getting her name wrong. "Table 6 needs their check." She froze, the pitcher trembling in her hands. Clint stepped back into the sunlight, his heart pounding, not with anger, but with resolve. This wasn't the end of his dance with Vine and Liberty. It was just the opening act. The next time he walked through those doors, he wouldn't be alone. He had people to find, warriors who'd help him rip the mask off San Francisco's self-righteous elite. What he'd seen had lit a fire in him, the same righteous fury that fueled his most iconic roles. But this wasn't a movie set with a tidy script. This was real, raw, and messy. And Clint Eastwood was about to deliver a performance that would echo far beyond that one glass of water. Clint's boots crunched against the cracked pavement as he made his way back to the veteran shelter. The weight of what he'd just witnessed pressing hard against his chest. The disguise still clung to him, Tom's masterful handiwork making him a ghost among the living. But his mind was ablaze with purpose. He pushed open the shelter's creaky door, the faint hum of conversation greeting him as James, Sarah, Michael, and a handful of others looked up from their chipped coffee mugs. "They wouldn't even give me water," he said, his voice low and steady, still cloaked in the rough timbre of his character. He expected outrage, maybe a chorus of curses aimed at Vine and Liberty's sanctimonious staff. But instead, the room met him with quiet, knowing nods, faces etched with the weary acceptance of a reality they'd lived too long. "Welcome to our world, brother," James said, his deep voice carrying a trace of gravel from years of barking orders in the field. The former Marine leaned back in his chair, his broad shoulders squared despite the weight of his own losses. There was pride in his eyes, a flicker of the man who'd hauled his squad to safety under a hail of bullets, undimmed even by the betrayal of a country that had left him to drown in debt. "I used to eat at that place every Sunday," he added, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The old owner, Chuck Wilson, he treated us like family. Gave me a plate of eggs and a handshake, no questions asked." That name, Chuck Wilson, stopped Clint cold. It was scrawled across every page of the acquisition paperwork he'd signed months ago, a signature that had sealed the deal transferring Vine and Liberty into his hands. "What happened to Chuck?" Clint asked, keeping his tone casual though his pulse quickened. Michael, the lanky army vet with the faded jacket, glanced up from his coffee. "Cancer got him," he said matter-of-factly, though his fingers tightened around the mug. "His widow, Mary, she tried to keep it going, but the medical bills piled up, and those corporate types swooped in with an offer she couldn't refuse. Promised to keep the veterans program running, promised a lot of things, actually." As if summoned by the mention of her name, the shelter door swung open, and in stepped Mary Wilson herself. She was a slight woman, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, but her presence filled the room like a quiet storm. In her arms, she carried a tray of homemade sandwiches, ham and cheese on thick, crusty bread, just like she and Chuck had handed out every week for 3 decades. Her eyes, sharp and kind, swept over the group before landing on Clint. She didn't know who he was beneath the disguise. But when Michael filled her in on what had happened at Vine and Liberty, those eyes welled with tears she fought to blink away. "Chuck would be heartbroken," she said, her voice soft but steady, the kind of strength forged through years of standing by her husband's side. "You know what he used to say? A restaurant isn't just about feeding stomachs. It's about feeding souls." That was his creed. Her words sank into Clint like roots into soil. And in that moment, he knew this wasn't just about exposing a lie anymore. It was about resurrecting something sacred. A place, a promise, a piece of a community's beating heart. He looked around at the small circle that had gathered. James, with his unyielding dignity. Sarah, her medic's hands itching to heal something, anything. Michael, clinging to pride in a world that had stripped him bare. And 2 others who'd drifted over, drawn by the quiet intensity of the moment. A wiry ex-Air Force pilot named Carla and a burly former tanker called Pete, both nursing their own scars. These weren't broken people. They were warriors, betrayed by the very society they'd sworn to defend, and Clint saw in them a strength that could move mountains. "Who's up for lunch?" he asked, a familiar half-smile breaking through the weathered mask of his disguise. "I know this place called Vine and Liberty." A ripple of surprise passed through the group, followed by a chorus of low chuckles, tentative at first, then bolder, as if they could sense the storm he was brewing. They didn't know what was coming, and neither did the staff at Vine and Liberty. But as they'd soon discover, justice has a way of arriving with a side of poetic irony, and Clint Eastwood was about to serve it up in spades. The lunch-hour sun hung high over San Francisco, casting sharp shadows across Vine and Liberty's pristine facade as Clint led his ragtag crew toward the entrance. 6 strong, they moved with a quiet purpose. James's steady stride, Sarah's cautious grace, Michael's loping gait, Carla's quick steps, Pete's heavy tread, and Clint at the helm, each footfall deliberate. The hidden cameras, still humming in their secret perches, tracked their approach, ready to immortalize what was about to unfold. The bell above the door jangled as they stepped inside, and the bustling hum of the restaurant, a mix of clinking glasses and self-important chatter, faltered into an uneasy hush. The manager, his designer glasses glinting under the chic pendant lights, materialized like a hawk spotting prey. "Sir, I told you earlier," he began, his voice tight with irritation. But Clint cut him off with a quiet firmness that carried the weight of 1,000 movie showdowns. "We'd like a table," he said, his disguised eyes locking onto the manager's. "Preferably the one by the window. You know, the one with the 'Everyone Welcome' sign right above it." The irony hung thick in the air, and the lunch crowd, mostly young techies and polished professionals, turned to stare, some already fishing out their phones, sensing a spectacle brewing. The room held its breath as the manager's jaw tightened, his polished facade cracking under the scrutiny. But then Jenny, the young waitress with the water pitcher and the flicker of defiance, stepped forward, her brown eyes blazing with something new. "I'll seat them," she said, her voice trembling but resolute as she clutched 6 menus to her chest. "Jenny, don't you dare!" the manager hissed, but she whirled on him, her ponytail snapping like a whip. "My father taught me better than this," she shot back, her words shaking with emotion. "He raised me on values, real values, not just the ones we slap in our windows to look good." What happened next would later explode across social media, racking up millions of views in hours. As the manager lunged to block their path, a customer, a lanky guy in a startup hoodie, squinted at Clint, his brow furrowing. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice rising over the silence. That's Clint Eastwood." The revelation hit the room like a thunderclap. You could have heard a fork drop as every head swiveled, eyes widening in disbelief. The manager's face drained from flushed red to ghostly white in seconds, his designer glasses suddenly looking comically out of place. Jenny's gasp was audible, her shock melting into understanding. Then a quiet triumph that lit up her features. But Clint wasn't done. Not by a long shot. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and peeled away the prosthetic mask, letting it fall to the floor like a shed skin. The weathered stranger was gone, and in his place stood Clint Eastwood, tall, unbowed, his steely gaze pinning the manager where he stood. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant, a sound that would have made any director proud. "Now," Clint said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "About that glass of water." And the cameras rolled, capturing every heartbeat of the moment. But this wasn't just about a gotcha reveal or a viral humiliation. It was the opening salvo in a battle for something bigger, something that would reshape Vine and Liberty and send shockwaves through a city that had forgotten its soul. Jenny stepped forward, her hands still shaking as she clutched the pitcher, but her chin lifted with newfound resolve. She poured a glass of water and handed it to Clint, her voice barely above a whisper. "My dad raised me watching your movies, Mr. Eastwood," she said, her eyes glistening. "He told me they taught him about integrity, about standing up for what's right. I guess today I finally got what he meant." Clint took the glass, his calloused fingers brushing hers, and for a moment those famous eyes softened, just enough to hint at the man behind the legend. The manager stammered, sweat beading on his brow. "Mr. Eastwood, I can explain," but Clint silenced him with a single raised hand, a gesture that carried the weight of Dirty Harry and every no-nonsense hero he'd ever played. "Let's start with the charity money," he said, his tone low and edged with steel that made the room hold its breath. "The donations meant for veteran shelters. Where are they?" The TV crew emerged from their shadows, cameras trained on the unfolding drama, as the producer handed Clint a folder thick with evidence. Every misappropriated dollar, every hollow social media campaign, every broken promise to Chuck and Mary Wilson's legacy. Clint turned, not just to the manager, but to the entire restaurant, his voice rising with quiet power. "I didn't come here to prove a point about a glass of water," he said, gesturing to his companions, James, Sarah, Michael, Carla, and Pete, standing tall behind him. "I came here because sometimes we need a reminder of who we really are as Americans. These men and women put their lives on the line for this country. And how do we repay them? With empty words, fake smiles, and signs in windows that mean nothing." His words hung heavy, a challenge and a plea rolled into one. The air in Vine and Liberty crackled with tension as Clint Eastwood's words settled over the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. The manager's mouth opened and closed, fish-like, as he groped for an excuse. But the evidence in Clint's hands, those damning pages handed over by the TV producer, spoke louder than any stammered defense. Jenny stood rooted by Clint's side, the glass of water she'd poured still glistening in his grip, her eyes darting between him and the manager with a mix of awe and defiance. The lunch crowd, phones still raised, had gone from gawking spectators to unwilling witnesses of a truth they couldn't unsee. And behind Clint, his small band of veterans, James, Sarah, Michael, Carla, and Pete, stood like sentinels, their weathered faces a silent testament to the stakes of this moment. Jenny found her voice again, stepping closer to Clint as if drawing strength from his towering presence. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her tone steadier now. "My father, he's going to be so proud when I tell him about this. He always said your movies weren't just entertainment. They were lessons about standing up, about doing what's right even when it's hard." Her father, a burly mechanic named Dave, who'd spent countless nights glued to Clint's films, had raised her on tales of justice and grit. She could almost hear his gruff voice now, echoing through the years. "Kid, real heroes don't just talk, they act." Today, she'd taken that lesson to heart, and the pride swelling in her chest was a fragile, beautiful thing. The manager, his curated coolness unraveling, tried one last desperate gambit. "We were just trying to update the image," he blurted, his hands flailing toward the social justice posters lining the walls. "Appeal to a younger crowd, you know. Keep the place relevant." Clint's gaze sharpened, cutting through the excuse like a blade through silk. "By forgetting our values?" he said, his voice a low rumble wrapped in velvet menace. "By turning away the very people who defended your right to post those virtue-signaling signs in your windows?" The words landed like a punch, and the manager shrank back, his designer glasses fogging with the sweat of his own panic. Then, a new figure emerged from the shadows of the doorway. Mary Wilson, her slight frame dwarfed by the weight of her presence. She'd been watching silently, her tray of sandwiches long since set aside at the shelter, drawn here by a pull she couldn't name. The older customers recognized her instantly. Her warm smile and Chuck's hearty laugh had been fixtures at Vine and Liberty for decades. A few rose to their feet, hats tipped in quiet respect as she stepped into the restaurant she'd once called home. Her eyes locked onto the manager, then softened as they found Clint. "Chuck always said character isn't about what you post on social media," she said, her voice thick with emotion but unwavering. "It's about what you do when nobody's watching, or when you think nobody is." The room seemed to hold its breath as Mary's words wove into Clint's, a harmony of truth that struck at the core of Vine and Liberty's betrayal. Clint turned to the manager, his expression unyielding. "You're right about one thing," he said, nodding toward the gleaming interior. "This isn't a homeless shelter. It's going to be something better, a place where everyone is truly welcome, not just the ones who fit your image." The promise hung in the air, bold and unshakable, and the manager's shoulders slumped as if he could feel the ground shifting beneath him. But Clint wasn't finished. He had one more thing to say, something that would ripple far beyond these walls, touching hearts and shaking complacent minds across America. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising with a quiet power that demanded attention. "We've got a choice," he said, gesturing to the veterans at his back. "We can keep slapping pretty words on windows and calling it kindness, or we can start acting like the country these men and women fought for. A country that honors its promises, that doesn't leave its own behind." He paused, letting the weight settle, then added, "Sometimes all it takes is a glass of water to show us who we really are, and who we can be." The transformation of Vine and Liberty began in that moment, sparked by Clint's resolve and fueled by the fire of a community waking up. Within days, the restaurant shed its hollow veneer like a snake, sloughing off dead skin. The first change was immediate and symbolic. A water station appeared at the entrance, its pitcher glinting under a simple sign that read, "Because kindness isn't just a word on a window." Anyone could take a glass, any time, no questions asked. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a start, a quiet nod to the dignity Chuck Wilson had always championed. Clint didn't stop there. The back room, once a cluttered storage space stacked with boxes and forgotten dreams, was gutted and reborn as the Veterans' Corner. Every day from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock p.m., it opened its doors to veterans in need, not with pity or scraps, but with proper meals served on real plates, hot and hearty, the kind of food that warms the soul as much as the body. "It's not about charity," Clint told a local news crew, his voice gravelly but firm as they filmed him overseeing the first day. "It's about honoring commitments, the ones these men and women made to our country, and the ones we make to never forget them." James sat at the first table that afternoon, a plate of roast chicken and mashed potatoes steaming before him, and for the first time in years, he felt seen. Not as a burden, but as a man who'd earned his place. Jenny, now promoted to manager after the old one slunk away in disgrace, threw herself into the change with a passion that surprised even her. She launched a hiring program for veterans, her father, Dave, beaming at her side as he volunteered to help train the new staff. "My daughter finally met her hero," he said one afternoon, his thick hands wiping down a counter as he grinned at Clint across the room. "Turns out, he's even more of a hero than she thought." The misappropriated charity funds, every last cent, was clawed back and redirected to real veteran support programs, with Mary overseeing the effort to ensure Chuck's legacy lived on in every dollar spent. But the real magic wasn't in the policies or the plaques. It was in the people. The same customers who'd averted their eyes when Clint first shuffled in as a homeless vet now lingered at the veteran's corner, swapping stories with James over coffee or listening to Sarah recount her days as a medic with a quiet pride she'd nearly forgotten. The social media warriors who'd once clogged the tables with their performative hashtags drifted away, replaced by a crowd that understood change comes through sweat and heart, not likes and shares. Mary, given an honorary role as the restaurant's soul keeper, moved through the dining room with a tray of her sandwiches, her eyes crinkling as she saw Chuck's dream reborn. "This," she said one evening, wiping away a tear as she watched Pete laugh with a young couple. "This is what Chuck always wanted, a place where everyone's dignity matters." The story of Vine and Liberty didn't stay confined to San Francisco. It spread like wildfire, a beacon for a nation hungry for something real. 4 months later, the restaurant wasn't just a local haunt. It was a blueprint for change. The Veterans Support Program had lifted over 20 former service members out of the shadows, finding them jobs, housing, and, most precious of all, their dignity. Businesses across the city took note, then beyond, as the ripple effect reached other states. That first glass of water, denied with a sneer, had turned into thousands of acts of kindness. A quiet revolution served one cup at a time. Jenny, now running the veteran program full-time, stood by the water station one crisp March morning, her father at her side. "Mr. Eastwood didn't just save a restaurant that day," she said, her voice steady with a confidence she'd earned. "He reminded us that real values aren't about what you say. They're about what you do when faced with a choice." The TV footage, though captured in vivid detail, never aired. Clint had nixed it. Sometimes, he told a lone reporter in his only interview, his squint as piercing as ever, "The best way to beat hypocrisy isn't to expose it. It's to replace it with something genuine." Today, a simple plaque stands by Vine and Liberty's water station. Character is what you do when you think no one's watching. Below it, a guest book overflows with stories, hundreds of lives touched. one glass at a time. This isn't just about Clint Eastwood unmasking fake virtue. It's about real American values. Not the ones we post online, but the ones we live when the cameras are off. If this story stirred something in you, hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to keep sharing these with you. This is Luig signing off. And here's your reminder. In a world of empty slogans, be the one who offers the glass of water.